Ohio. Flat, boring, forgettable. That's what most people think. And most people are dead wrong. Because hiding inside this state, tucked behind cornfields, county roads, and absolutely unremarkable highway exits, are towns so bizarre, so historically chaotic, so genuinely strange that they feel like they were invented by someone who lost a bet. We're talking about a village that decided the 1930s were close enough to the present, a town that got erased by the federal government and then replaced with ghost stories. A tiny community with a name so absurd that telling your Uber driver where you live is basically a personal crisis. And a place where a French real estate scam from the 1700s still exists as a functioning riverfront town today. None of this is fiction. All of it is Ohio. And by the time we hit number 1, you're going to look at this state in a way you never have before. Let's get into it. Number 10. Gallipolis. Let's open with what might be the most spectacular real estate failure in American history. The year is 1790. Hundreds of French citizens, freshly traumatized by the chaos of the French Revolution, are being sold a dream: fertile land in the Ohio Territory, a fresh start, a paradise waiting across the Atlantic. The brochure was convincing, the salespeople were enthusiastic, the whole pitch sounded incredible. There was just one small problem. The company selling the land didn't actually own it. Welcome to Gallipolis, Ohio, a name that literally translates to City of the French, and a town that was born from one of the most chaotic colonization blunders in early American history. Gallipolis sits along the Ohio River in the southeastern corner of the state, right on the border with West Virginia. Today, it's a quiet river town with a population of roughly 3,200 residents. Median home prices hover around $140,000, making it one of the more affordable small towns anywhere in the region. Median household income sits around $47,000, which reflects the broader economic reality across Appalachian Ohio. Crime rates are generally moderate for a town this size. Violent crime stays relatively low, though property crime pops up occasionally in the older downtown areas. Most residents work in healthcare, education, and manufacturing, with plenty commuting across the river into West Virginia for work. So, on the surface, Gallipolis looks like a peaceful river community with some nice historic architecture and a farmer's market probably happening somewhere on a Saturday morning. But the origin story is absolute chaos. Here's what actually happened. In the late 1700s, land speculators in Europe were aggressively marketing Ohio Territory parcels to French citizens desperate for stability after the Revolution. Hundreds of people bought in. They packed their belongings, said goodbye to everything familiar, and crossed the entire Atlantic Ocean based on paperwork and a promise. When they arrived in Ohio, they discovered that the land titles they were holding were legally worthless. The company that sold them the land had no clear ownership rights, which meant instead of walking into ready-made farms and fertile paradise, these settlers walked into dense forest, confusing property disputes, a severe shortage of supplies, and the dawning realization that they had been completely played. That is a rough welcome package. You've just survived a transatlantic voyage, a revolution, and a paperwork nightmare, and Ohio greets you with trees and legal confusion. Eventually, American officials stepped in and granted some settlers new land nearby. Slowly, painfully, the town rebuilt itself. And over time, Gallipolis stabilized into the river community it is today. The failed settlement story didn't disappear, though. It became part of the town's identity. Today, Gallipolis celebrates its French heritage through historic architecture, cultural festivals, and markers that tell the story of those early settlers who refused to give up even after everything went sideways. A local resident once joked that Gallipolis started as a real estate scam and somehow evolved into a riverfront community, which might honestly be the most accurate town origin summary ever written. Here's the part that gets me every time. Somewhere in 1790, there was almost certainly one French guy in that group raising his hand and saying, "Should we maybe verify the land ownership before we cross an entire ocean?" And the rest of the group absolutely looked at the brochure, looked back at him, and said, "No, the pictures look great, we're going." Next thing you know, everyone's standing in an Ohio forest, axes in hand, wondering at what point their life turned into a frontier survival situation. This is why you always read the fine print. Always. Gallipolis proves something that comes up again and again with strange Ohio towns. Sometimes the weirdest places aren't built from bold success. They're built from disasters that people simply refuse to walk away from. And that stubbornness, as chaotic as it was, created something that still stands today. Speaking of things that refuse to disappear, the next town on this list didn't just survive history, it literally rewound it. Number 9. Roscoe Village. Most towns spend decades trying to modernize, fighting for relevance, chasing development, begging for a new highway exit or distribution center to save the local economy. Roscoe Village looked at all of that ambition, took a long, slow breath, and said, "We're going back to 1837. Welcome to Roscoe Village, a restored canal town tucked inside Coshocton County, Ohio, that looks less like a functioning community in the 21st century and more like someone accidentally left a time machine running for about 60 years. We're talking brick warehouses, wooden storefronts, horse-drawn canal boats gliding down actual waterways, blacksmith shops where someone is genuinely hammering iron right now. And somehow, it all still works. Here's the history. Roscoe Village started in the 1830s as a major canal port along the Ohio and Erie Canal. Back then, canals were the interstate highway system of the Midwest. Everything moved by water. Coal, grain, whiskey, manufactured goods. If it needed to get somewhere, it went by boat. And Roscoe sat right in the middle of that traffic, thriving as a commercial hub. Then the railroad arrived. And if you've ever watched a technology get completely destroyed by a newer technology, the canal industry's relationship with the railroad is the historical version of that. Canal traffic didn't just slow down, it collapsed. Almost overnight, the economic engine that had powered Roscoe Village for decades went completely quiet. Businesses shuttered, buildings decayed, residents left. By the late 1800s, the town was fading steadily into the kind of forgotten history that eventually gets replaced by a parking lot. Then, something unexpected happened in the 1960s. Instead of demolishing the old commercial district and starting fresh, which is what most towns would do, Roscoe Village decided to do something almost no American community has ever successfully pulled off. They restored it. Not modernized it, not reimagined it. They literally rebuilt it to look exactly as it did in the canal era. Every brick, every storefront, every wooden beam was brought back to match the original 1800s aesthetic. And today, Roscoe Village is essentially a living, breathing, functioning historic district where real people actually live inside what looks like a museum exhibit. The nearby Coshocton area has a population of roughly 11,000 residents. Median home values sit around $145,000, which is well below national averages and makes it one of the more affordable communities in the state. Cost of living runs about 18% cheaper than the U.S. average. Crime rates are relatively low, especially compared to larger Ohio cities. The local economy leans heavily on tourism, small retail, and historical attractions, which means the town's single biggest economic asset is literally its past. Visitors come to walk the old cobblestone paths, ride canal boats pulled along the waterway by actual mules, watch blacksmith demonstrations that look straight out of a history textbook, and browse shops that sell the kind of handmade goods that would have moved through this canal port nearly 200 years ago. One visitor on Reddit summed it up perfectly. Roscoe Village feels like stepping into a history museum, except people actually live there. And that's the genuinely strange part. This isn't a theme park with actors, it's a real town where daily life happens inside what's essentially a full-scale historical reenactment Think about how weird that commitment is. Most places spend enormous energy trying to attract a Starbucks or a new apartment complex. Roscoe Village stood in front of the future, pointed firmly at the past, and said, "No, we're going this way." And honestly, it worked. History tourism is fascinating until you remember how genuinely uncomfortable the 1800s actually were. Oh wow, an authentic canal-era cabin. Beautiful. Also, zero plumbing, no electricity, no Wi-Fi, and definitely no food delivery. You would last approximately 4 hours before you were aggressively searching for a gas station microwave burrito. But for a weekend visit, absolutely worth it. Picture this. You're walking through Roscoe Village just after sunrise. The morning air is cool. Cobblestone paths curve past old brick buildings glowing amber in the early light. You hear the slow, rhythmic creak of a canal boat rope and the steady clip-clop of mule hooves moving along the towpath. For a genuine moment, it feels like you actually slipped through time. Then someone walks past scrolling their phone and the illusion completely shatters. Built in the 1830s, nearly lost in the late 1800s, restored in the 1960s, still standing today. That's a survival story most towns would envy. And if a town that chose to freeze itself in the past is strange, the next entry on this list is a town that got its entire identity from a name that nobody has ever been able to fully explain. Number 8. Knockemstiff. Let's just say it immediately and get it out of the way. There is a real, officially recognized, actually on-the-map community in Ohio called Knockemstiff. Not a joke, not a nickname, not something a group of teenagers spray-painted on a water tower. The actual name. And yes, locals are completely used to the reaction you're having right now. Knockemstiff is a tiny, unincorporated community in Ross County, Ohio, sitting roughly 70 miles south of Columbus in the rolling hills of Appalachian southern Ohio. Population is genuinely difficult to pin down. Estimates suggest a few hundred residents at most, scattered across rural farmland and forested hillsides, which means the name is almost certainly the loudest thing about the place. Almost. The surrounding Ross County area tells an economic story that's common across rural Appalachian Ohio. Median household income sits around $55,000, which falls below the national average. Housing, though, is cheap by almost any modern standard. Median home values hover around $150,000, and some rural properties go for considerably less. Crime in small communities like this tends to concentrate around property-related incidents rather than major violent crime. Employment is mostly tied to Chillicothe, the nearest small city about 20 minutes away, where healthcare, corrections facilities, and manufacturing provide the bulk of local jobs. So, statistically, Knockemstiff is a quiet, affordable, rural community with modest incomes and not a whole lot going on. Except for the name. The name that nobody can fully explain, that everyone has a theory about, and that somehow has followed this tiny crossroads for generations. There are 3 main origin stories floating around, and none of them have been definitively proven. Version 1, a local preacher once told his congregation to knock the devil stiff if evil ever came calling. The phrase stuck. Version 2, a notorious tavern brawl somewhere in the town's early history ended with the bartender allegedly instructing someone to knock the troublemaker stiff, and the story spread faster than any formal naming process. Version 3, and honestly the most believable, it was simply a dark-humored nickname that circulated long enough and loud enough that at some point someone wrote it on an official document and it never got changed. Rural Ohio towns do this sometimes. They lean into the joke so hard that eventually the joke becomes the identity. And for a community this small, Knockemstiff has had a genuinely outsized cultural impact. Author Donald Ray Pollock grew up here and wrote a critically acclaimed short story collection called Knockemstiff, drawing on the raw, gritty reality of life in this specific corner of Appalachian Ohio. That book eventually became a major influence on the Netflix film The Devil All the Time, which means this tiny, barely labeled crossroads community somehow ended up shaping a Hollywood production. Not bad for a place most GPS systems treat as a rounding error. I love imagining the meeting where this name got formally approved. Someone stands up, clears their throat, and says, "Okay, folks, we need to settle on a name for the town sign. What are we thinking?" And from the back of the room, someone goes, "Knock 'em stiff." And instead of the immediate unanimous rejection that should have followed, the entire room just slowly nodded and said, "Yeah, that tracks." Now think about living there and having to explain your address to literally anyone. Where are you from? Knock 'em stiff. Where? Knock 'em stiff. Is that near? It's near Chillicothe. Please stop asking questions. I've been through this. Some towns are hard to find on a map. This one is hard to explain to anyone who's never heard of it, and the explanation doesn't really help. Knock 'em stiff proves something genuinely interesting about small American towns. Sometimes the strangest thing about a place isn't a legend, a disaster, or a geographic quirk. Sometimes it's just a name someone forgot to reconsider. And now it's permanent, forever, on a sign at the edge of a cornfield in southern Ohio. Up next, a town that had a genuinely brilliant geometric city plan, and then voted to destroy it. Number 7. Circleville. Here is a sentence that sounds made up but is completely historically accurate. There was once an Ohio town designed as a literal, mathematically precise circle. Not a circular neighborhood, not a roundabout, the entire town. Streets curved around a central park, buildings followed the arc. The layout, viewed from above, looked like someone handed a city planner a compass, a ruler, and 0 other tools and told them to just go for it. The town was called Circleville, and the circle did not survive. Circleville sits about 25 miles south of Columbus in Pickaway County. Today, it has a population of roughly 14,000 residents. Median home values hover around $220,000, well below the national average, making it one of the more affordable small towns within commuting range of the Columbus area metro. Median household income sits around $65,000, and unemployment typically runs slightly below the national average, thanks to manufacturing, logistics, and the overflow of Columbus area job opportunities. Violent crime runs about 20 to 25% lower than the national average. On paper, Circleville is a perfectly stable, reasonably affordable small town, nothing radical. But in 1810, this place was doing something architecturally insane. Early city planners discovered a massive ancient earthwork circle on the land, constructed centuries earlier by the Hopewell Native American culture. Most developers would have cleared it and built a standard grid. Circleville's founders did the opposite. They decided to design the entire town around it. A central circular park where the earthwork sat, streets radiating outward from the center like spokes on a wagon wheel, houses and commercial buildings following curved roads that wrapped around the design. From a purely conceptual standpoint, genuinely impressive. From a practical standpoint, trying to navigate a circular road system in the 1800s with no GPS, inconsistent signage, and everyone slightly confused about which curved road leads where, it was reportedly a nightmare. Navigating Circleville's original layout was roughly as intuitive as assembling furniture with instructions written in a language you've never studied. By the mid-1800s, residents had seen enough. They voted to tear out the circular layout entirely and replace it with a normal street grid. The ancient earthwork was demolished, the curved roads were straightened, the circle was gone. Circleville today looks like every other Midwestern small town you've ever driven through. Straight roads, standard blocks, nothing remotely circular anywhere. But the ghost of that original design gave the town something unexpected, a personality. And that personality eventually centered on one very specific obsession: pumpkins. Circleville hosts the Circleville Pumpkin Festival, one of the largest fall festivals in the entire Midwest. Every October, this quiet town of 14,000 people absorbs over 400,000 visitors. That's nearly 30 times the town's population, descending on a single community for 1 week of orange-themed celebration. And when they say pumpkin festival, they mean all in. Pumpkin donuts, pumpkin burgers, pumpkin chili, pumpkin ice cream. At some point, someone in Circleville looked at a gourd and decided it was not just a food, but an entire lifestyle category. I'm personally convinced that if the festival ran 1 week longer, someone would successfully pitch pumpkin gasoline and 3 people would genuinely try it. So, the town that was once defined by a perfect geometric circle is now defined by a giant orange vegetable. And you know what? That's a genuinely lateral move I respect. Sometimes the boldest ideas in history aren't the ones that lasted. They're the ones people tried, realized weren't working, quietly demolished, and replaced with something everyone could agree on. Turns out, everyone could agree on pumpkins. And if redesigning an entire town because the original geometry was impractical sounds bold, the next place on this list committed to an identity so thoroughly that a cryptid became their marketing department. Number 6. Marblehead. Most people don't know Marblehead, Ohio exists, and Marblehead is completely fine with that. Sitting on a narrow limestone peninsula that juts out into Lake Erie in Otio County, Marblehead is one of those places that looks like it was designed specifically to make you feel like you've accidentally left Ohio and ended up somewhere along the New England coast. Rocky shoreline, dramatic lake views, fog rolling in off the water on cold mornings. The kind of atmosphere that feels like it belongs in a completely different state. And right at the tip of that peninsula stands the Marblehead Lighthouse. Built in 1821, it holds the distinction of being the oldest continuously operating lighthouse on the entire Great Lakes system. Over 200 years of guiding ships through some of the most temperamental freshwater in North America. Let that sink in for a second. This lighthouse has been operational through the Civil War, both World Wars, the Great Depression, and whatever we're calling the current era. Still standing, still working. In Ohio. Marblehead itself is tiny. Permanent population sits around 900 residents. Median home values hover around $250,000, pushed upward by water property demand and the kind of location that people will genuinely pay a premium for. The local economy runs almost entirely on seasonal tourism. From May through September, this small peninsula transforms into a popular Lake Erie destination, with visitors arriving for fishing charters, lighthouse tours, ferry access to the Lake Erie Islands, and scenic views that look legitimately like somewhere a travel magazine would feature. Then October hits, the visitors evaporate, the population drops back to its 900 permanent residents, and Marblehead becomes exactly what it is for most of the year. A quiet, wind-swept limestone peninsula where everyone knows everyone. The lake makes sounds at night that you didn't know lake freshwater could make, and the lighthouse keeps blinking across the water the same way it has since 1821. There's something genuinely eerie about a place that operates on 2 completely different realities depending on the calendar. In summer, it's scenic, bustling, photographed constantly, full of tourists who discovered it on a travel blog. In winter, it's the kind of quiet that has texture. The wind off Lake Erie isn't gentle, the limestone bluffs amplify it. And when the fog comes in, that lighthouse isn't just historic, it feels necessary. The permanent residents of Marblehead are a specific kind of person, the kind who looked at the option of living in a normal, inland Ohio town with consistent cell signal and reliable restaurant hours and said, "No, I want the peninsula. I want the lighthouse. I want November on Lake Erie. I'll see you in spring." Honestly, that tracks. There's a particular type of stubborn, atmospheric commitment to staying in a place most people only visit for a weekend, and the year-round population of Marblehead has that energy completely locked in. Here's what's fascinating about Marblehead in the context of weird Ohio towns. It's not weird because of a legend. It's not weird because of a historic disaster. It's weird because it exists at all. A tiny limestone peninsula with a 200-year-old lighthouse, a population smaller than most apartment buildings, and a seasonal identity crisis that flips completely twice a year. And it just keeps going. Same lighthouse, same peninsula, same lake, different century. So, we've covered a French real estate disaster that somehow became a riverfront town, a community that rewound itself to the 1800s and decided to stay there, a crossroads with a name that breaks every GPS system in a 3-county radius, a town that built a perfect geometric circle, hated it and destroyed it, and a limestone peninsula with a lighthouse older than most countries. And here's what you need to understand right now. Those were the easy ones. What's coming in part 2 is a different category entirely. We're talking about a town the federal government quietly erased and replaced with ghost stories so convincing that people still believe them today. A village of 560 people somehow trapped inside one of the most visited national parks in America. A place where a Bigfoot sighting in 1978 turned into an actual economic development strategy that worked. A tiny Ohio farming town that looked at rural America and decided what it really needed was more Switzerland. And then there's number 1. Number 1 is the kind of place that makes you stop and genuinely ask, how is this real? How does this exist? And why has almost nobody talked about it? Part 2 drops soon, and trust me, you are not emotionally prepared for where this countdown ends.